Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 2nd of December 2021 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Before starting with today's discussion, there is a small announcement for all of you. See, recently we have released the Mains Compass magazine for all the subjects. These Mains Compass magazine have been prepared keeping in mind the requirement of the UPSC Mains examination. See, the syllabus for the UPSC Mains examination is extremely vast. So if a particular student has to prepare for the Mains syllabus, first and foremost, he has to go through multiple sources. Apart from that, even after going through multiple sources, he has to convert each of these sources into exam-centric knowledge. This takes considerable amount of time. Now, for example, let's say you want to prepare for the agriculture section in the GS paper 3 Indian economy. You would be required to go through multiple sources such as current affairs related to Indian agriculture, the recommendations of the Dalwai panel, the recommendations of the National Commission on Farmers, or say India at 75 strategy document by Niti Aayog. So first thing is you would have to go through multiple sources, and secondly, each of these sources you would have to convert into exam centric knowledge. Now this is extremely time consuming exercise. So in order to make your preparation more easier, more exam centric, we have prepared these Mains Compass for all the subjects. So these Mains Compass magazines, they can become your one-stop reading material for the UPSC Mains examination. There is no need for you to search for multiple sources for the UPSC Mains. You can simply rely on these Mains Compass magazine. See, these Mains Compass magazine that we have released, they would be important both for the upcoming Mains examination as well as the next year Mains examination. Now, if you are preparing for the next year Mains examination, I would suggest you to not to keep waiting for the Mains Compass 2022. So whatever topics which we have included in Mains Compass 2021, they will also be included in Mains Compass 2022 next year. So there is no need for you to keep waiting for the release of the Mains Compass 2022. You can take up the Mains Compass 2021, read it, and as and when the Mains Compass 2022 is released next year, most of the things which you have already studied will be included there. So it will be more of a revision for you. The link to all of these Mains Compass magazine has been provided in the description box below. So you can click on the link and order for these Mains Compass magazine through the Amazon. Continuing with our weekly series of Mains assignment question from the Daily News Simplified videos. The question for this particular week here is, the problem of handling e-waste in India needs to be scientifically and industrially discussed. The answer to this particular question has to be written in 150 words. Now, before writing the answer to this particular question, I suggest you to go through the DNS dated 25th of October 2021, in which we have discussed all the aspects related to the e-waste management in India. Now, this particular article appears on page number 12. The article is titled as Public-Private Partnership in the Indian Railways. Now, this particular article highlights that the Ministry of Railways has decided to scrap the tender which it had earlier invited for the operation of the private passenger trains in India. So, before discussing various aspects which could become important from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination, let us first understand the background. See, right now, the government of India enjoys a monopoly in running the passenger trains. And we know that whenever the government enjoys monopoly in providing a particular services, it normally leads to inefficiency as well as poor service delivery. For example, for most of us, traveling by trains has become a nightmare. Trains do not arrive on time, they do not depart on time, the quality of service delivery is also extremely poor. So, in order to attract greater private participation in the Indian Railways, in the year 2019, we launched India's first corporate train known as the Tejas Express. Now, we call this as the corporate train because this Tejas Express it is not run by the Ministry of Railways directly. Rather, the Tejas Express is run by IRCTC, which is a subsidiary of the Ministry of Railways. Now, the Tejas Express is operating on some important routes in India. Prominent among them include Delhi, Lucknow. Now, the IRCTC company has been given complete freedom with respect to fixing the passenger fares. Apart from that, the IRCTC company is also required to pay certain amount of commission or fee to the Ministry of Railways from the profit which it generates. So this model of Tejas Express was hugely successful. So based upon this particular model, in the year 2020, the Ministry of Railways came up with a proposal to open up around 109 routes across India for the operation of the private trains, which means that on these 109 routes, you as a passenger, you would have a choice. Either you can travel through a government run train or you can travel through a private train. So far, people as such do not have such kind of choice. So the government wanted to infuse competition with respect to running of trains in India. So this competition would in turn help us improve the efficiency as well as service delivery. So when the government came up with such a proposal, big private entities such as L&T were highly enthusiastic to operate the private trains in India. So based upon the initial enthusiasm shown by the big companies, in the year 2021, to be more specific, in July 2021, the government of India invited bids, or it came out with a tender inviting bids from the private entities for the operation of the private trains. However, the government has received bids from only two entities. One among them once again happens to be IRCTC. Now, this clearly shows that whatever initial enthusiasm the private entities had shown, that initial enthusiasm no longer exists. That is why the private entities have not come forward for the operation of the private trains in India. And that is why the Ministry of Railways had to cancel the auction mechanism. So based upon this particular understanding, let us understand as to what things becomes important from the perspective of prelims and the mains examination. See, as far as the prelims examination, one should be aware about the National Rail Plan 2030, which was announced in the Union Budget 21-22. Then one should also know about the viability gap funding, which is a kind of financial support which the government gives for public-private partnership projects. Now, this concept of VGF becomes important because recently, as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat package, the government has introduced some important changes in the viability gap funding. As far as the mains examination is concerned, one should be aware about various aspects such as what is the need for PPP, what are the challenges in the public-private partnership in Indian Railways, and how to address these challenges. So based upon this, you have two mains question for practice. One question here is, discuss the need for PPP in Indian Railways. How does this model benefit the different stakeholders? Second question is, give a reasoned account for the poor response of the private sector for the PPP in railways. What strategies must be adopted to encourage greater private participation in railways? At the end of this particular discussion, we'll also discuss a model answer wherein I will be highlighting as to how should you approach the answer to this particular question. And these are your three practice questions from the perspective of the prelims examination. So let's start our discussion with respect to why there is a need to promote public-private partnership in the Indian Railways. See, presently, if you see, there is huge political interference in fixing of passenger fares. Consecutive governments have deliberately kept the passenger fares lower because of the vote bank politics. So because of the low passenger fares, the Ministry of Railways is incurring huge amount of losses. So to compensate for these losses due to low passenger fares, the Ministry of Railways has increased the freight charges, that is, the charges for movement of goods. Now we call this as cross subsidization. So cross subsidization in this particular case means that the losses incurred due to low passenger fares is in turn compensated by increasing the freight charges. So if you compare the cost of transportation of goods through railways with that of roadways, Because of the cross subsidization, it is much cheaper to transport goods through roadways rather than that of the railways. So there has been a modal shift in the transportation of goods from railways to roadways. So much so that now the railways account for hardly around 27% of the freight traffic, whereas the roadways account for 64% of the freight traffic. So over a period of time, more number of goods are now transported through roadways rather than railways. This is on account of cross subsidization. So because of this cross subsidization, railways is making huge amount of losses even on the transportation of goods as well. So on account of these reasons, if you look at the operating ratio of railways, it is quite higher at 98.4. Now this essentially means that in order to earn every 100 rupees, the Ministry of Railways spends 98.4. So you can imagine the extent of profits which it is making. It is extremely low. So the overall financial position of railways is extremely poor. So because of its poor financial position, the railways is not in a position to undertake more amount of investment to improve the capacity addition, and the quality of service deliveries also remain quite poor. For example, it has been highlighted that in the year 2019-20, the Ministry of Railways was unable to provide confirmed ticket to almost around 5 crore passengers, which clearly shows poor capacity addition. Further, it has been estimated that between the years 2018 to 2030, Indian Railways would need an investment of almost around rupees 50 lakh crores. But the problem here is the Indian Railways financial position is extremely poor, so it may not be in a position to undertake higher investment. So in order to come out of this vicious cycle, there is a need for public-private partnership in the Indian Railways. Let us now understand as to how does the PPP model in the railways work and how it will benefit the different stakeholders. See, I hope all of you must be knowing that the public-private partnership, it is a form of agreement between the government and the private entities. That agreement provides for well-defined roles and responsibilities for the government and the private sector. In case of PPP in Indian Railways, the role of the Ministry of Railways would be to provide the necessary infrastructure that is needed for running of the private trains. So Ministry of Railways would provide the basic infrastructure such as railway tracks, signaling and the railway station. As far as the private entities is concerned, the private entity will be required to bring in its world-class AC coaches. So these AC coaches should be next generation coaches. They should provide world-class amenities such as automatic doors, LED screens, free Wi-Fi, etc. So on certain routes in case of India, you would have a choice in either to travel by the Indian Railways, that is government run train, or by a private train. As far as the private trains are concerned, they would have complete autonomy in fixing the passenger fares. And here, as you can see, these private trains are using the infrastructure provided by the Ministry of Railways. So they are using the railway tracks, signaling, railway stations, etc. So for use of this particular infrastructure, the private entities will be required to pay the haulage charge to the Ministry of Railways. Apart from that, whenever the government wants to open up a particular route for the operation of private trains, the government would invite bids from the private entities. Now, for example, let's say the Delhi Lucknow route is to be opened up for the private participation. So, the government would invite bids asking private entities as to how much of revenue they are willing to share with the government. Now, for example, let's say you have three private entities A, B, and C, and let's say the private entity A is willing to share 20% of its revenue from its passenger trains with the government, and let's say B is willing to share 25% of its revenue, and C is willing to share 30% of its revenue that it earns from the private trains. So in this particular case, the private company C is willing to share highest percentage of its revenue with the government of India, and accordingly this private sector company C will be given this particular route for the operation. So a private entity operating a private train will be required to pay two types of charges to the government. One is the haulage charge for the use of infrastructure, and second it should also share a certain percentage of revenue with the Ministry of Railways. And lastly, here, in order to ensure that the private trains are operating in the best interest of the passengers, the government will lay down certain performance standards. And if the private entities are failing to meet these performance standards, the government can impose penalties or fines on such private trains. Now, for example, the government can impose conditions such as the private train should arrive on time, they should depart on time, they should maintain necessary cleanliness, and if they are not being able to meet these performance standards, the government can collect penalties or fines from such private entities. So this is how the PPP model is going to work. And as far as the benefits to different stakeholders is concerned, I hope this is self-evident or self-explanatory. So as you can see, the PPP model would benefit the passengers, it will benefit the Ministry of Railways, and it will benefit even the private entities as well. Initially, the private entities were highly enthusiastic to operate the private trains. However, this enthusiasm has waned down. This clearly shows that there are significant constraints and challenges with respect to promotion of PPP in Indian Railways. So let's try to understand as to what are these concerns and challenges. First and foremost is the high entry barriers. See, as I said, the private entities are required to bring in their fully modern AC coaches. These modern AC coaches should provide world-class amenities such as automatic doors, LED screens, free Wi-Fi on board, and so on. And these modern AC coaches are extremely costly and they cannot be afforded by most of the private entities. So smaller private entities will not be able to buy these costly modern AC coaches. And without bringing in these fully modern AC coaches, the private entities cannot operate the private trains. So that's the first thing. Second is with respect to higher charges which the private entities are required to pay. See, as I said, the private entities are required to pay for the haulage charge for the use of railway infrastructure such as tracks, signaling, railway station, and they are also required to share certain percentage of revenue with the Ministry of Railways. Now, the private entities believe that the charges which they are required to pay is quite higher. For example, if you look at this haulage charge is to be paid by the private trains irrespective of the number of passengers they are carrying. So irrespective whether they are carrying just 10 passengers or 100 passengers or 500 passengers, compulsorily they are required to pay for this haulage charge. Now, for example, it has been highlighted in newspaper recently that IRCTC, which is operating the Tejas Express between Delhi to Lucknow, per day basis, it is required to pay approximately rupees 15 lakhs in the form of haulage charge. And this charge is to be paid irrespective of the number of passengers it is carrying. So there may be days when IRCTC may not be able to get more number of passengers, but in spite of that, it still would have to pay higher haulage charge. So clearly this is a major constraint as far as the private entities are concerned. The third aspect is with respect to lack of level playing field between the government and the private trains. See, the private trains believe that presently the government enjoys huge powers as far as PPP is concerned. This is so because the government is the one which is making rules with respect to public-private partnership. Government is not just making rules, government is also competing with the private trains. And apart from competition, the government is also deciding on the disputes which may arise in future between the government trains and the private trains. So here, government is making rules as to how to promote competition between the government trains and private trains. It is also competing with the private trains. And in case of future disputes, the government is deciding on the disputes. So there is huge centralization of powers in the hands of the government. And because of huge centralization of powers in the hands of government, the private entities believe that the government may not create a level playing field between the government trains and the private trains. Now let's understand how. Now, for example, the government is the one which is making rules as to how the PPP model should work. Now, for example, here the private entities believe that what if the government make rules which favors the government trains over and above the private trains? What if these rules are not being able to create a level playing field? Now, for example, the government may come up with certain favorable policies towards the government trains in terms of their departure timings, in terms of their arrival timings, or in terms of allocation of platforms. Now let me substantiate this by taking a simple example. Now let's say there is a Delhi Mumbai route and the peak hour traffic for this particular route is 9 p.m., which means that any train which leaves Delhi to Mumbai at 9 p.m., this particular train will be able to get maximum number of passengers in Delhi. Now, what if this peak hour traffic is taken up by the government train and the other timing is allocated to the private train? Now, the private train will not be able to get more number of passengers, right? So here it is the government which is making rules with respect to promoting of PPP. And what if the government makes certain rules which favor the government trains over and above the private trains, particularly with respect to the departure timings, arrival timings, or the allocation of platforms and so on. So overall, the private entities believe that there is lack of level playing field between the government trains and the private trains. In order to substantiate this further, I hope you must have seen this particular movie, that is The Dictator. In this particular movie, The Dictator, the main character Aladdin, he conducts the Olympic Games. And in that particular Olympic game, he is making rules, he is also competing, and is also giving medals to himself. Now, this is a very crude way of understanding as to how centralization of powers can go against the interests of the other competitors. So other competitors will feel that there is lack of level playing field because there is huge centralization. The same can be seen here with respect to the railways, because the government is making rules, it is also competing, if the government is also deciding on the disputes. So the private entities have an apprehension that the government may not create a level playing field. Now, why this becomes important is in any sector, wherever we are trying to attract the private sector investment, there is a need for an independent regulator. Take for instance banking. In case of banking, you have both public sector banks as well as private banks. And we have been able to attract the private sector into the banking domain because of the presence of an independent regulator in the form of the Reserve Bank of India. So it is the Reserve Bank of India which will ensure that there is free and fair competition between the public sector banks and the private banks. So unless the private entities believe that there would be a level playing field between the government trains and the private trains, we would not be able to attract the private participation. And to do that, we would have to set up an independent regulator. The next aspect is with respect to competition. See, right now, let's say you want to travel from Delhi to Mumbai. After the introduction of private trains, you would have three options to travel from Delhi to Mumbai. The first option is to travel through a government train. The second option is to travel through a private train. And the third option is to fly from Delhi to Mumbai. Now let's compare between the government train and the private train. As I said, the government train maintains heavily subsidized prices. So passenger fares on the government run trains is extremely low. In comparison, the private trains fares will be very high. So the private entities believe that they would not be in a position to compete with the government trains because of the low passenger fares. So if people are not so much concerned about service delivery, if people are more cost conscious, these people would shift to the government trains instead of traveling to the private trains. And let's say you have certain upper middle class people and the richer people who can afford to travel by private trains. But in this particular case, these people, that is the upper middle class and the richer people, they would have a choice to travel from Delhi to Mumbai either by private trains or they can fly. Now the kind of amenities which they are able to get on the private trains is similar to the kind of amenities which they would get on the flights as well. And the advantage they would get by flying is that they would be able to reach Mumbai hardly in 2 to 3 hours. Whereas if they travel to a private train, it may take a much longer time. So private entities believe that they will not be able to compete with the government trains just because the government trains provide for heavily subsidized passenger fares, and they would not be able to compete with the airline companies in terms of the time taken to reach the destination. Now this particular aspect of aviation becomes altogether more important because of the Udan scheme. So as you know, under the Udan scheme, even the government is subsidizing the airfares. So when the airfares are heavily subsidized, the private trains will not be able to compete with the airline companies. The next aspect is with respect to unreasonable terms in the PPP agreement. See, as I said, under the PPP agreement, the government will lay down certain performance standards to be met by the private trains. and if the private trains are unable to meet these performance standards, they will be required to pay penalties or the fines. For example, the government can lay down conditions that the private trains should depart on time, they should arrive on time, and so on. So, if the private trains fail to arrive on time or if they fail to depart on time, they will be required to pay penalties or fines to the Ministry of Railways. For example, as you can see here, the Tejas Express had to pay a compensation of almost rupees 4 lakh to the passengers for a delay of 2 hours. So, this is the case here. Now, this is considered to be a problem by the private entities because their ability to depart or their ability to arrive on time is in turn depends upon the signaling which is provided by the Ministry of Railways. Now, what if there is a default in the signaling mechanism? What if the government does not provide the signaling to the private trains on time? Then obviously they will not be able to depart on time. They will not be able to arrive on time. So here they will be forced to pay fines. They will be forced to pay penalties for a problem which may lie with the government of India. So the government does not provide signaling on time. It is the private entities who will have to bear the burden and pay penalties or the fines. So this is one of the unreasonable term in the PPP agreement. Apart from this, there are other large number of unreasonable terms which you need not know from the perspective of the mains examination. So what should be done in order to ensure the success of public-private partnership in the railways? First and foremost, we must implement the recommendations of the Bibek-Debroy Committee on Railway Modernization. One of the most important recommendations of this particular committee is to set up an independent regulatory authority, which should be called as Railway Regulatory Authority of India. The role of this regulatory authority would be to ensure that the passenger tariffs which are fixed, they should be market determined and not heavily subsidized. And secondly, it should also act as a dispute settlement body for any kind of disputes which arise between the government and the private entities. So just like how we have set up an independent and autonomous regulator in the banking domain in the form of the Reserve Bank of India, we need to set up a similar regulatory authority even in the railways as well. Secondly, the government should provide viability gap funding for the private sector, particularly for those projects which are considered to be financially unviable. Now, if you look at the VGF, this is a scheme which is presently implemented by the Ministry of Finance. Under this particular scheme, the Ministry of Finance provides the necessary financial support to the PPP projects which are considered to be economically justified but financially unviable. Now, for example, let's say you need to construct a solid waste management plant through the public-private partnership. Now, this is economically justified, but it may not be financially viable because the private entities may not be able to make more amount of profits. So, if there are certain projects which are financially unviable, the private entities will not come forward. So to encourage the private participation in those financially unviable projects, the government provides the funding in the form of the viability gap funding. So this viability gap funding for the physical infrastructure projects, this is 20% of the project cost. And for the social infrastructure projects, earlier it used to be 20%. But as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat package, it has been increased to 30%. So for various social infrastructure projects such as education, housing, sanitation, hospitals, etc., the total amount of support given by the government is up to 30% of the project cost. Now, for example, let's say the project cost is equal to 100 crores. So, out of this total project cost of 100 crores, the government would provide a financial support of minimum 30 crores. The details of the viability gap funding have been included in the PDF as well. And lastly, we need to design the PPP agreement in such a way that we are able to attract the greater private participation. First and foremost, one of the biggest problem this time was that the government did not carry out the prior consultation with the private entities before inviting their bids. So henceforth, whenever the Ministry of Railways goes for inviting bids, once again, it should carry out the prior consultation with the private entities, understand their concerns, understand their challenges, and accordingly design the PPP agreement in such a way that the risk and benefits are equitably shared between the government and the private sector. So these are some of the important aspects which you should know as far as this particular article is concerned. Now lastly, coming to the model answer. See, the question here is, Give a reasoned account for the poor response of the private sector for the public-private partnership in the Indian Railways. What strategies must be adopted to encourage greater private participation in railways? So, based upon the understanding of this particular question, you would know that this particular question has basically two dimensions. First dimension is what are the reasons for the poor response of the private sector for the PPP in railways? And the second dimension is what strategies must be adopted to encourage the greater private participation. So, both these dimensions should be included in the body of the answer. As far as the introduction is concerned, in the introduction, you could incorporate the rationale for introducing PPP in railways and the very fact that this has failed recently. So as you can see in the introduction, I have written the Indian Railways has sought to promote PPP to operate passenger trains to reduce monopoly, infuse competition, generate more revenue, provide world-class services and come out of the vicious cycle. This has further been substantiated through this particular diagram. So here I have highlighted the rationale for PPP in railways and it has got recently failed. Based upon that, you will list out all the reasons for the poor response for the private participation in railways and then the strategies. And when you are recommending the strategies, you must take support of the Bibek Debroy Committee on the Modernization of Railways. And as far as conclusion is concerned, in the conclusion you can mention that various other infrastructure sectors such as roads, ports, airports, etc. have been able to attract the private sector investment, but unfortunately we have unable to do so in the railways. And that is why we must try to address these challenges and encourage greater private participation in the railways. And lastly, coming to the prelims questions. See, as far as prelims practice question number 2 and 3 is concerned, I have already explained the concept of the viability gap funding. So based upon the explanation, I hope you should be in a position to attempt these two questions. As far as the practice question number 1 is concerned, for this particular question, I would want you to search about the National Rail Plan 2030 on your own and then attempt the question. Please let me know the answers to these questions in the comment section given below. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now this particular article appears on page number 1 of the Hindu supplement, that is text and context. The article is titled as Examining the Federal Nature of the Central Bureau of Investigation. See, whenever any kind of serious and heinous crimes are committed and when the local police does not carry out the investigation properly, people normally demand for the CBI investigation. This is because of the trust that the people have in the functioning of CBI. This is because of the credibility earned by the Central Bureau of Investigation. However, almost around 8 states across India have withdrawn the general consent to the CBI for investigation of cases. So this withdrawal of general consent by 8 states has severely handicapped the functioning of the Central Bureau of Investigation. So as far as your prelims examination is concerned, one should be aware about various basics related to the Central Bureau of Investigation, such as when it was established, what are the types of crimes it can investigate, when can it take up a particular case. This becomes important in the context of the recent withdrawal of the general consent by the state governments and aspects related to the appointment of CBI director. All of these things will become important from the perspective of the prelims examination. And as far as the mains examination is concerned, one should be aware about the current issues in the functioning of CBI and how to address these issues. So based upon our understanding of this particular article, a mains question for your practice here is, the time has come for releasing the caged parrot. In the light of this statement, discuss the challenges faced by the Central Bureau of Investigation. What reforms should be introduced to strengthen its independence and autonomy? Apart from that, these are the 3 practice questions from the perspective of the prelims. So let's get into this particular discussion, understand various aspects related to CBI. See, the CBI has been established under the provisions of the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act 1946. So one of the most important aspects that you should know with respect to CBI is that CBI is neither a statutory body nor is it a constitutional body. So CBI, it has been set up under the executive resolution of the government, and such an executive resolution has been passed by the government under the provisions of the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act. That is why CBI is considered to be a non-statutory body. On the other hand, If you see CVC, the Central Vigilance Commission, this CVC has been established under a law passed by the Indian Parliament known as the Central Vigilance Commission Act. That is why CVC is a statutory body while CBI is a non-statutory body. So with respect to the type of crimes which can be investigated by CBI, broadly in CBI we have three divisions. One is the anti-corruption division, economic crimes division, and the special crimes division. So CBI as such can investigate three types of crimes. The crimes related to corruption, and when it investigates the crimes related to corruption, such an investigation is taken up under the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. And in all such matters, the CBI reports to or exercised under the general superintendence and direction of the Central Vigilance Commission. And when it is investigating cases related to economic crimes or special crimes, it functions under DOPT, that is Department of Personnel and Training. So with respect to when can the CBI take up a particular case? See, CBI first and foremost can take up a case in the union territories on its own. That is, so moto, the CBI can take up the investigation of the cases in the union territories. However, if it has to take up a case in a particular state, it can do so only with the general consent of the concerned state government. This has been provided under the Section 6 of the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act. So unless the state government provide the general consent to the CBI cannot proceed with the investigation of a particular case. But on the other hand, if the CBI has already started investigation of a particular case, and if later the state government withdraws the general consent, the CBI can continue the investigation of a pending case, but it cannot take up a new case for investigation. Apart from that, the Supreme Court and High Court can also order the CBI to investigate crimes anywhere across India, even without the consent of the state government. With respect to the appointment of CBI director, earlier the director of CBI was appointed under the provisions of the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act 1946. But now the CBI director is appointed under the provisions of the Lokpal Act. For the appointment of CBI director, we now have a selection committee comprising three members. These three members are Prime Minister of India, the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, the Chief Justice of India, or any other judge of Supreme Court who is nominated by the Chief Justice of India. So this three-member selection committee in turn makes an appointment for the CBI director. And once a person is appointed as CBI director, such a person would have a tenure of 2 years. Now coming to various issues with the functioning of the CBI. So in case of India, we can come across two types of bodies, that is the statutory bodies and the non-statutory bodies. The statutory bodies are established under a law passed by the Indian Parliament, because of which they have very well-defined roles and responsibilities. They enjoy the necessary independence and autonomy, and there is very less scope for political interference in the functioning of these bodies. Take for example the RBI, SEBI, CVC, etc. On the other hand, as far as the non-statutory bodies are concerned, since there is no law governing their roles and responsibilities, since they have been established through a government notification, they do not have the necessary independence and autonomy. There is huge scope for political interference in the functioning of such non-statutory bodies. So like I said, the Central Bureau of Investigation is a non-statutory body, which means that CBI as such does not enjoy the necessary independence and autonomy, and there is huge political interference in the functioning of CBI. See, one of the role of the CBI is to investigate the cases related to corruption, and consecutive governments have deliberately used CBI in order to target their political opponents as well as the state governments. So if they want to force certain political party or a political opponent, then the ruling party can use the CBI to slap the corruption charges against their political opponents. So that is why CBI over a period of time has been losing its credibility. So because of the constant political interference, CBI has found it difficult to carry out impartial, neutral and credible investigation of various cases. So this particular problem has got so accentuated that the Supreme Court way back in the year 2013 had highlighted that the CBI has become a caged parrot which is speaking in its master voice. Which means here that the Supreme Court was highlighting that the CBI on its own does not has the independence, it does not has the autonomy. Whatever the government says, the CBI does. So that is why the CBI was referred to as caged parrot speaking in its master voice. The next problem is with respect to limited powers of CBI. See, consecutive governments have used various central agencies such as the Income Tax Department, Enforcement Directorate, Central Bureau of Investigation. These central agencies have been used to target the political opponents and the state governments. That is why some of the state governments, to be more specific, 8 state governments have withdrawn the general consent to the CBI, which means that now the CBI will find it extremely difficult to take up the investigation of cases in these 8 states. Apart from that, as I highlighted before, the Central Bureau of Investigation cannot suo moto take up the investigation of the cases. The next aspect is with respect to personnel management. See, if you look at the role of the Central Bureau of Investigation, it has to carry out the investigation into certain high profile crimes related to corruption, economic crimes, special crimes, etc. So, in order to take up the investigation of such high profile crimes, CBI needs a large number of experts such as the cyber forensic experts, financial audit experts, and so on. But presently, there is huge shortage of manpower in the CBI, because of which most of the time the CBI is unable to take up the investigation of cases. Even if it takes up the investigation of cases, there is huge delay in the disposal of such cases. Nextly, the CBI as such has no dedicated cadre, which means that to a large extent the CBI is in turn dependent upon the other government ministries and departments for personnel. For example, the CBI is dependent upon the Home Ministry for the IPS officers. Now, these IPS officers get deputed to CBI on a short term basis. Similarly, if the CBI has to take up a case before the courts, the CBI would have to depend upon the Law Ministry for the lawyers or the prosecutors. So, in this regard, a number of committees have given their recommendations as to how to strengthen the functioning of CBI. First and foremost, as highlighted by second ARC as well as LP Singh committee, we need to come out with a separate law for CBI, which means that the CBI as such should be established as a statutory body. So this particular law should define the roles and responsibilities of CBI. It should ensure the necessary independence and autonomy for CBI, and it should ensure that the government of the day is not able to interfere in the functioning of the CBI, which means that whatever independence and autonomy which the organizations such as Election Commission of India, UPSC, CAG, etc. enjoy, the same level of independence and autonomy should be enjoyed even by the CBI as well. Apart from that, recently the Madras High Court has given a suggestion to the government that the CBI director, he should be given the same powers as a secretary to the government, and he should report directly to the Prime Minister. This would ensure that there is less political interference in the functioning of the CBI. The next aspect is with respect to expanding the powers of CBI. So here, the 24th Parliamentary Standing Committee has recommended that the CBI should be allowed to suo moto take up the investigation of crimes anywhere across India, and there should be no need for the CBI to depend upon the general consent of the state government. So, as such, the CBI should be given the pan India jurisdiction. So, just like how the CBI can suo moto take up the investigation of cases in the union territories, the CBI should be allowed to do the same even in the states as well. So, CBI as such should become a truly federal agency as recommended by the 24th Parliamentary Standing Committee. The next aspect is to provide the necessary financial, personal, and operational autonomy to the CBI, for which, first and foremost, we need to have a separate dedicated cadre within the CBI so that the need for the CBI to depend upon the other ministries reduces. So, by having a dedicated cadre within CBI, the overall morale and motivation of the officers would be high. These officers would have a guaranteed career growth, and overall, we will be able to ensure that there is less political interference in the functioning of CBI. Nextly, we would have to increase the staff particularly experts in the field of forensics, cybercrimes, etc. And lastly, we would have to allocate higher finances to the CBI in order to improve its infrastructural facilities such as forensic labs, IT infrastructure, and so on. So, based upon our understanding, I hope you should be in a position to attempt these three prelims questions for the practice. Please let me know the answer in the comment section given below, and also try to write an answer to this particular mains question for practice. With this, let us now take up the next article. This particular article appears on page number 11. The article is titled as the Global Gateway Plan. This article becomes important from the perspective of UPSC prelims, particularly with respect to the international relations. Now, this particular article highlights that the European Union is set to spend approximately around 300 billion euros in order to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. See, I hope all of you must be aware about China's Belt and Road Initiative. See, the Belt and Road Initiative of China is basically an initiative to improve trade, infrastructure, and investment networks across the world. It seeks for greater integration among three continents, that is Asia, Africa, and Europe. However, China's Belt and Road Initiative has come under immense criticism because of the debt trap for the poor countries. Already, countries such as Pakistan, Sri Lanka, etc., have come into the debt trap because of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Apart from that, the COVID 19 pandemic has adversely affected the global economy. In particular, the poor economies have got adversely affected, leading to a decline in their GDP growth rate. Hence, in order to expedite the global economic recovery, as well as to challenge China's Belt and Road Initiative, the European Union has come up with a grand plan known as the Global Gateway Plan. So, as the name suggests, this is a plan which the European Union has come out with in order to integrate the European Union with the rest of the world. So, just like Belt and Road Initiative of China, the Global Gateway Plan is set to focus upon the creation of infrastructure. So, the priority areas under the Global Gateway Plan is digitization, clean energy, transportation, education, health, and so on. For example, as part of the digitization, European Union would focus upon laying down of the optic fiber cables between the countries, focus upon greater satellite communications, cloud infrastructure, and so on. This will in turn facilitate global cooperation, sharing of data, and the development of artificial intelligence. Similarly, the Global Gateway Plan also focuses on clean energy, wherein the European Union have committed themselves to providing of grants to the African countries to boost the renewable energy. And in a direct challenge to China's Belt and Road Initiative, the Global Gateway Plan is also going to focus upon the creation of transport infrastructure such as railway lines, roads, ports, airports, border crossings, and so on. So, as part of the Global Gateway Plan, just like how China is providing necessary financial support to other countries, even the European Union would provide the necessary financial support to the other countries in order to boost their infrastructure. And it will also focus upon promotion of online education, promotion of healthcare facilities, and so on. So this is what you must understand from the perspective of Global Gateway Plan as far as the UPSC prelims examination is concerned. The next article appears on page number 10. The article is titled as India joins the G20 Troika. This article shall be important from the perspective of prelims, specifically under the subsection of international relations. Now, this particular topic also becomes important because, as you can see in prelims 2020, we had a direct question related to G20. So, let us understand some important aspects of G20, including the concept of Troika. So, G20 was founded in the year 1999, particularly after the Asian financial crisis. So, when the Asian financial crisis took place, a need was felt that the largest economies across the world need to coordinate with each other and avert any kind of financial crisis in future. So, it was behind this particular backdrop that G20 was founded in the year 1999. So, the G20 as such, it is an informal multilateral forum which brings almost like 19 countries and one grouping, that is European Union, on a common platform. Now, the significance of G20 here is that these G20 countries account for 80% of the world's GDP, 75% of the global trade, and 60% of the world's population. So, basic objective of founding the G20 is to ensure greater coordination among the 20 largest economies in order to promote growth and development. The second objective is to promote financial regulations in order to avert or prevent any kind of future financial crisis and to create new international architecture. As far as the members of G20 is concerned, as I said, it has 20 members, which includes 19 countries and one grouping. So it has all the BRICS countries, it has the G7 countries, and then it has other countries as well, whose names are there in front of your screen. I hope you should be able to remember these countries. As far as the troika within the G20 is concerned, the troika here basically comprises of the current, previous, and the incoming presidencies. Now, for example, the current presidency happens to be Indonesia, and India is set to become the new president of G20. So, India is set to take over the presidency of G20 on December 1st, 2022 from the current presidency, that is Indonesia. So, that is why India has now joined the G20 troika. Apart from 20 members which I have highlighted, the G20 also has certain permanent guest invitees. And these permanent guest invitees include the international organizations such as IMF, ILO, that is International Labour Organization, UN, World Bank, World Trade Organization, OECD, ASEAN, etc. Apart from this, even Spain is considered to be a permanent guest invitee to the G20. And please do note here that G20 does not has a permanent secretariat or a staff. So these are some important aspects from the perspective of the UPSC prelims examination. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day. The answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option A.